Now, let me introduce you to Dr. Glenn, who is a veterinarian. Hold up, my man went to medical school not to learn how to actually treat animals, but instead how to clap monsters, and to be precise, he prefers big meloned monster girls. He receives proposals left and right, a centaur tries to clap him, even mermaids want to have his babies. This anime follows the story of how the doctor rizzes up all the female patients, and drum roll please, claps them. Sigh. Seems this is becoming anime animal at this point, the way these chicks want to get clapped by their veterinarian. He is living my dream, and he's not just any doctor, he's a doctor for big meloned monster girls, pretty to the core, and they make you just want to tear off your mini schnauzer and clap the beast out of them. Once there was a war so gruesome between humans and the animals, I'm sure the humans wanted those melony creatures to themselves. The war concluded when both sides were exhausted and they just happily left together and possibly commenced interspecies clapping. Glenn has a patient, a cowgirl. Yeah, you heard that right. She's got huge melons and gosh, what's wrong with my Excalibur? Side note, I would 100% drink that milk. Glenn's doing a thorough examination on those melons. She gladly sings the songs of melons because this melon lump check is getting out of hand. He checks her ears too and tells her she's with child, and looks at her husband, who looks like a full-blown cow with horns. This is another anime where the men look like the animal by face and skin, and the ladies look humanoid with just horns, ears, and a tail. Glenn's assistant, Safe and Teat, slithers in with some flowers to congratulate the happy cow couple. She's feeling a bit moody though. Turns out she doesn't like Glenn being alone in a room with another woman, especially when that woman is singing the song of angels from Joyous Melon Endeavors. She wants him to call her Sappy like he did during school days. A letter from Dr. Dully arrives inviting them for a checkup session. The next day, Glenn and Teat are off to the arena, and when they arrive at the arena, they're greeted by a centaur. Not just any centaur, but a centaur princess named Tessalia, who's also a fighter. Tessalia struts in and greets them, and after some royal introductions, Glenn gets to work. His first patient is a cat girl who wants to clap Glenn so badly that she jumps on him. Teat is not having it and uses her tail to whip the cat girl off Glenn. Tessalia comes in for her checkup. She starts becoming free for her checkup and starts talking about how she doesn't really want a rigid person but a calm clapper like Glenn. What a weird way to say she doesn't want a Sigma male. Teat is not having this too, she butts in on the conversation. Later that night, Glenn can't sleep, troubled by something he heard from Tessalia's attendants Kay, a brown hair centaur with huge melons, and Lorna, a blue hair centaur with equally huge melons. When I saw the melons on these centaurs, I realized how majestic they are, but I'm not in a hurry to name a meloneer of this series yet. They're worried because Tessalia's been losing fights lately, even though she's got talent and works hard. Teat comes in, and they brainstorm why Tessalia might be struggling. Teat offers to bring Glenn some juice to help him relax, and when she returns, she gives him a simple glass and chugs a jug like Zoro from One Piece. She gets tipsy and uses her tail to wrap Glenn. I thought she was going to clap the humanity out of him, but she threatens him, saying that Dr. Cthulhu would never forgive her if she claps him. The next day, Tessalia loses another fight, and that night, while she's training, she's ambushed by Glenn and a few others who came to get her hooves done despite her disagreement. She cries like a baby and sings the Song of Angels while Glenn was adjusting her knees to the right position. Teat was not about to let her sing the Song of Angels her way into Glen Nether regions. She wrapped the horse in her tail and shoved her tail end in her face. The next day, Tessalia wins her match so effortlessly and cheers like a kid who just won a Fortnite game. Flashback to their childhood. Teat was once sent to Glenn's household as a hostage during the war. They got close, but as the war ended, they were separated. They reunited years later at the academy, where their bond only grew stronger. Now they work together, but when will they clap together? And it has been on my mind, how is this interspecies clapping thing going to happen? They set off on another adventure, this time by boat, with a mermaid pulling them along the Miro waterways. Teat's thrilled to be on a side quest, just the two of them. They enjoy the sights, all while Teat's shopaholic instincts kick in, but Glenn kicks them out as he strictly wants to stick to business. He denies her going for a mermaid show, but then a mermaid named Lula offers to sing them a song, and they pull closer to listen. He thinks of a method of payment while looking at the mermaid. Teat accuses him of mind clapping the cod liver oil out of her. Glenn offers Lula a free medical exam, and she accepts. Her singing voice is so wonderful that it would make you wonder how she'll sound singing the Song of Angels. but she suddenly starts coughing. Glenn takes her to a less crowded area and checks her throat and discovers it's inflamed. He inspects her gills too. She sings the Song of Angels in full adoration, saying she can't take more of his fingers up in her gills, but Teet tells her to be a strong lady and pull herself together. It's like a THREE summon a yatch. Lula for shorts, has been spending more time on land than in sea, and it's disrupting her whole mermaid system. Just as she rants about needing to make more money for the family by surfacing a lot longer than usual, a kid falls into the rushing water and Lula dove in to save the day. As soon as she does, she begins to drown, and as soon as Glenn notices, he takes no time in diving in and saving her with the last breath in his lungs. He got to get and all the air he could pour into her, and then he lost consciousness. She took him to the boat, and Teet yelled at him for being so thoughtless. A few days later, Lula, revitalized by Glenn's cough drops and gill care routine, performs for the entire town. Her voice is so powerful it makes autotune obsolete and has the crowd giving her a standing ovation, but she's still flustered from the whole underwater incident and likely wants to clap our boy, but she swims off blushing. He thinks she hates him, but I'm guessing Teet knows that Lula wants to clap him. In another part of the city, Kunai, a flesh golem with joined parts than Frankenstein, is chasing bandits. After helping out a slime, a priest-like lady called Lady Scotty comes in with Madame Frankenstein, who's missing an arm, and they discuss. Later on, Glenn heads out and stumbles upon a severed leg of the same Madame Frankenstein and realizes Kunai's been in a fight. However, the thing about the severed body part is, Kunai can still feel them. Wherever she was, she began to feel hands rubbing all over her severed and misplaced chopstick. She feels like a maiden who's being prepared to be clapped. Kunai laments about them severing he body parts and toying with them, but all I could picture are those pointy melons you can sneak peek at 1219. While in search of the owner of the leg or the hand of the owner of the leg, Glenn comes across Lula, who plays a part-time hero, and hands Glenn Kunai's missing arm, which she found during her swim. He cleans and massages the body part, and the owner of those body parts could not help it but scream out the voice of angels. Glenn finally finds Kunai and fully embraces his role as the BBL doctor and tells Kunai to sit tight while he gets to work reattaching her limbs. Kunai pretends she doesn't need help, but secretly enjoys Glenn touching all her sensitive parts and making her chopsticks shake. I'm sure that is all the action she has gotten in a long time. Glenn tells her to shut up and let him do his job, pulling out scissors and needles that look like they were borrowed from a Black Clover arc. Kunai, who has a newfound respect for Glenn after seeing him handle her body with more care than a collector with limited edition figurines, she lets him put her legs together, and I'm sure she enjoyed him playing so close to get Peach. She talks about how her creator, an idiotic doctor, made her unable to feel pain, but Glenn's touch makes her feel something in the line of clap feelings. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, Teet's getting teased by Orca, another patient. She teases Teets about Glenn probably clapping the jingles out of some other lady out there. After finishing up with Kunai, who's now fully reassembled like an expensive action figure, Glenn heads back to the clinic. There he finds Teet looking more pregnant than the cow he told was with child. Ooh! She was secretly in his sleep. That did happen, I'm just saying. Just as Glenn's heart was about to run out of his ribcage, he pulls closer to her and she shows him that it was just a prank and she has an egg someone found and brought over. The bandits, apparently thinking they're in an Attack on Titan spin-off, barge into the clinic, and Teet, now in full protective waifu mode, takes one out without breaking a sweat. Glenn, realizing this night's not going to end without some Shounen-level fight scenes, grabs Teet and makes a run for it. I can't get over the joy of calling her Teet or saying the word Teet narrows the situation down to the fact that the bandits think they're working with Kunai. Speaking of the devil, Kunai, who's already taken down a bandit herself, explains the whole harpy egg and ring. Glenn realizes the egg they have belongs to a harpy and that the bandits are likely after it. Just when things couldn't get more chaotic, Lady Scotty herself shows up on a boat pulled by Lula, who's apparently upgraded from pop star to full-time water taxi. Glenn accuses Scotty of exploiting Lula's poverty, but Scotty tells Glenn to know his place. Lula, now fully embracing her role as the side character with a tragic backstory, steps in to defend Scotty, saying she's doing this of her own free will. With the gang all assembled, they head off to expose the bandits, fully prepared for what's likely to be a One Piece arc finale battle. The patrol team is ready to charge through the front door like it's the entrance to the Grand Line with one goal in mind: rescue the kidnapped Harpy girls. Lady Skady apologizes for dragging everyone into this mess. The bandits launch an ambush with arrows, but our heroes dodge them with the agility of ninjas that have been binge-watching Attack on Titan. Kunai charges headfirst into the fray, taking a few arrows like they're just minor inconveniences. Tessalia and her team of Melanie centaurs make a grand entrance, overpowering the bandits like they're swatting flies. They tell Glenn and the others to keep moving towards the hideout. One dumb bandit starts ranting about how humans and monsters are never meant to live in peace. Tessalia, not having any of it, knocks some sense into him. Meanwhile, the boat arrives at their destination, and Kunai orders Lula to swim away to safety. Just as things seem to be going smoothly, the bandits' leader shows up, looking like a discount villain from Sword Art Online. He and Kunai exchange insults, with him justifying his heinous acts of living beings as necessary for survival in this post-war world. Kunai, tired of his nonsense, calls him an ugly bottom-feeding dog and challenges him to a sword duel. The clash is on. She tells the others to seize the moment and rescue the Harpy girls while she keeps the leader busy. The patrol team busts in like they're storming the gates of a Sirai Tai, while Glenn and the others rush to the Harpy girls. One of the bandits tries to sneak up on them, but Scotty, who has clearly been holding back, finally shows her true strength. She wipes the floor with him so easily it's like she's playing Smash Bros with the difficulty set to beginner. They open a door and find the kidnapped Harpy girls, who are understandably freaked out. Glenn starts talking to them and they plead for help, as one of them is experiencing severe pain in her stomach. Glenn immediately gets to work, diagnosing that an egg is stuck due to the stress the poor mother has been under. Glenn examines her there and says she needs to be tended to immediately. The bandits barge in ready to fight, but Teet, Tessalia, and Scotty team up to take them down. Teet were poisoned and passed out. Teet tries to reveal who she truly is, but is shocked that Glenn knew all along. Suddenly, Teet's mood shifts to something more... It's mating season, and she decides it's the perfect time to get closer to Glenn. She pulls his skinny self to the bed and holds his hands like it's BDSM. Look at those round perks on her melons. The poison kicks in again with impeccable timing, and the lives to see another day as a few weeks later, Glenn and Teet are on a journey with Tessalia and her subordinates on their way to do checkups on the Harpies. Glenn is concerned about Illy, the Harpy girl who had given birth, especially since she's now unable to fly after being kidnapped. He's determined to do something about it. A landslide hits the carriage, injuring one of Tessalia's centaur as they protected her. Glenn rushes out to examine Lorna, who has taken a serious hit. Despite her protests, Glenn diagnoses her with a fractured leg and insists she needs immediate medical attention at the nearest village. The Harpies arrive just in time to escort them to the village. Glenn explains the situation and asks the Harpies to carry Lorna. Once they arrive, they meet with the Harpy elder while Glenn checks on Lorna. It turns out her injury isn't as bad as they feared, just a sprain. Lorna, being the stubborn warrior she is, tries to stand up but fails out of pain. Later, the Harpies form a line for Glenn to examine them, and they all thank him for saving them. But when he asks for Illy, they tell him she doesn't want to meet him. Glenn eventually finds Kay alone by a river, where she tells him that she was with Tessalia but got separated. Glenn asks Kay about her relationship with Lorna, and she recounts their backstory, how they were both orphans who became big meloned bad after serving Tessalia's family. Just as things are getting serious, Tessalia arrives and scolds Kay for wandering off alone. During dinner, Tessalia vents her concerns about Kay's recent clumsiness, which has been getting worse ever since they arrived at the village. Teet asks Tessalia about her business with the Harpy elder. Tessalia reveals that her family is looking to collaborate with the Harpies, using their ability to fly for business purposes. But Kay's behavior has been jeopardizing the negotiations. Tessalia asks Glenn to examine Kay, but Glenn suspects Kay's just worried about Lorna's condition. Tessalia doesn't accept this answer and offers Glenn the finest booze in exchange for his help, to which Teet eagerly agrees. As Glenn stresses over how to help Kay, Teet slices up some apples and suggests that trapping Lorna inside might help calm her nerves. Glenn, clearly taking notes from every Eki anime ever made, decides to put this idea into action. He ties Lorna up in a makeshift bondage using a blindfold, and this half-centaur tells him to tie it even harder. She likes SM, that way so Y-Tube does not pick it. It's for scientific purposes to help Kay focus. Kay surprisingly seems to feel better with her new restraints. The next day, Kay was free of her bandages. Then Glenn, Tessalia, and Teet all head out to check on Illy. He checks Illy's temperature by tickling her underarm. Illy's reaction is a mix of, "Stop it, that tickles," and "What kind of doctor are you?" Teet pulls Glenn back, reminding him to be a bit more gentle and stop making it feel like he's about to clap his patient. She can't bear the thought of that. Meanwhile, Tessalia cheers Glenn on, telling him to go harder. Glenn, Illy, however, isn't having it. She refuses to accept that losing so many feathers is normal and sends a foot containing 3 sharp claws at Glenn, calling him a quack, but Tessalia stops her mid-attack, reminding her who's the real boss around here. Illy storms off and flies away, leaving Tessalia to clean up the mess. Tessalia finds Illy and has a heart-to-heart with her, where Illy reveals that she's Tessalia's #1 fan and dreams of fighting like her in the arena. Tessalia, feeling flattered, corrects Illy, explaining that her battles are more about elegance than brute strength. Tessalia grabs a stick and challenges Illy to show her what she's got, telling her she's been talking a lot of smack for someone who can't back it up. Tessalia is back in the treatment room with Glenn, recounting how she fights for Glenn's honor, while Teet, never one to hold back, agrees and suggests she should have shoved the stick right through Illy's beaks. Meanwhile, the is worried that Illy might get kidnapped again if she runs away. Tessalia hands Glenn one of Illy's feathers that fell during their spar, and Glenn notices something unusual about it. The next day, they gather all the feathers of the same color as Illy's, and Tessalia expresses her wish that Illy finds a place where she belongs. Enter Teet, who rushes to Glenn out of jealousy. Emma be disappointed if someone calls the virgin first with all protectiveness, carrying a random assortment of feathers. She's not particularly thrilled about Glenn spending so much time with a rather dashing rival-like Tessalia who wants to clap him so bad. She slithers off, leaving Tessalia to tell Glenn that maybe Teet is struggling in the village's environment, which isn't exactly snake-friendly. Just as things seem to be calming down, a harpy arrives with news. Illy is missing. The dumb cow flew around and now she can't fly anymore and she's stuck in the woods. Glenn is trying. I would have left her out in the woods that night. Maybe after being gang-clapped by some bandits, her melon tips will cool off. Glenn and the others are searching for her, and Teet, using her snake eyes, finds Illy first. Illy tells them to leave her alone and go clap themselves instead. But Glenn takes charge and shows her that her feathers are changing, not because she's sick, but because she's growing her adult feathers. And not just any feathers, these are special phoenix-like feathers that will make every other bird jealous. Illy, now filled with hope, raises her feathers, excited about the prospect of flying again in the future. A few days later, she shows Glenn her new feathers, which look like a mix of all the weirdest ice cream flavors you've ever seen. Glenn asks her why she didn't want him to examine her in the first place, and Illy, blushing, admits that she couldn't look him in the eye after he saw her, well, let's just say, lay an egg. Illy flies off, leaving behind a feather that Glenn catches. He notices that the feather is strangely hot, perhaps a sign of the phoenix spirit burning inside her. Afterward, Glenn, because he just can't catch a break, teaches the harpies how to shower because, let's face it, they reek worse than an otaku's bedroom after an all-night anime binge. One of the girls acts all clapped up when the brushes her feathers, and in the chain of anime reaction, all the girls drag for who would feel Glenn's touch next. Later, Illy barges into Glenn's clinic, covered in a sticky substance that definitely looks like she was flying through the woods and a giant nut all over her. Why did I use flying when I could have said she was rubbing his Excalibur, and boom! Nut everywhere. Glenn examines her and deduces that it's from an Arachin, a half-man, half-spider creature. He advises Illy to take a hot bath, but when Illy invites him to join, Teet steps in to snipe that down as fast as Lightning McQueen. Soon after, more harpies show up with the same issue, and Glenn realizes they need to handle the root of the problem. He and Teet venture into the forest, following the silk trails like a breadcrumb path, only to fall right into the Arachin's trap. The Arachin reveals herself as Arania, an old friend of Teet who has come to track down the harpy with the phoenix feathers. Glenn introduces Arania to Illy, but the sight of the phoenix feathers sends Arania into a frenzy. She chases Illy through the forest, much to Tessalia's dislike, who is already on edge training nearby. Tessalia, panicking at the sight of the spider, demands that Glenn control the situation. Teet defends her spider friend, even quoting Uncle Ben about great power and responsibility, but Tessalia isn't buying it. The two argue, with Glenn trying to play mediator until Teet leaves on a sour note. Tessalia warns Glenn that he's overworking Teet and suggests he relieve her stress with a little personal attention. Later that night, Glenn, in a rare moment of relaxation, decides to take Teet to a hot spring to help her unwind. The next day, the peaceful village life is disrupted by rumbling sounds, and the village elder sends his best men to investigate. Meanwhile, Teet is enjoying her hot bath with the horses, leaving Glenn to deal with the chaos alone. Arania, still not over her obsession with the phoenix feathers, visits Glenn's office and pretends to be sick just to get his attention. As Glenn examines her, Arania takes the opportunity to flirt with him, hinting that she now understands why Teet has the hots for him. She even asks him to walk with her, which Glenn agrees to. However, things take a turn when Glenn steps on another of Arania's traps, and she reveals her true intentions of wanting to clap him and make her 8 chopsticks shake. As she was about to get the business started, she's interrupted by Tessalia. Tessalia and Arania get into a heated argument about who is the better multiple-legged creature suitable to clap Glenn, with Arania calling Tessalia a hypocrite for acting all high and mighty while secretly being just as much of a freak as she is. This triggers Tessalia, who refuses to be compared to an 8-legged creep, and attacks Arania. Things were about to get out of hand. Teet shows up, saving Glenn from the crossfire. She asserts her dominance, making it clear that Glenn doesn't have time for love, a statement that clearly hurts her. Later that night, after everything is calmed down, Glenn and Teet share a drink, and in a moment of vulnerability, Teet confesses her love for him. Glenn, caught completely off guard, doesn't know how to react, but Teet, now drunk and emotional, pours her heart out. She admits she's Scotty Red, that one day someone will take him away from her, especially with Tessalia showing such determination to marry him. Glenn, feeling the weight of the situation, assures Teet she's the only one who's got the perfect for him. See what I did there? Suddenly there's an explosion that sounds like a Godzilla just landed on the wrong side of town, and the ground starts shaking like it's auditioning for a disaster movie. Everyone scrambles outside, and the elder shows up, dropping the bombshell that a giant god has woken up on the wrong side of the bed and is in a full-blown temper tantrum. This looks bad and everyone is panicking, but cue Tessalia, who steps up like she's about to give an inspirational speech, and she orders Illy to fly off and inform Lady Scotty that the giant is back in town. Then she turns to the rest, commanding them to prep for evacuation like they're gearing up for the grand finale of a survival anime that reminds me of everything they geared up in AOT. So many people still meet their demise. Tessalia even ropes in Arania to use her silk to pack up everyone's luggage, and who does she turn to for the big guns? Glenn, to help those flightless harpies take to the skies again. The plan works out better than you'd expect from an impromptu evacuation, and after Glenn helps the last patient, he and Teet start packing their bags. But just when you think things are calming down, another quake hits, threatening to destroy their precious stash of medicine. The villagers are hightailing it out of there, but Glenn notices that Tessalia is MIA. Turns out she's pulled a Goku and headed to the mountains solo, ready to face this giant god head-on to buy time for everyone else. She's even got a half-baked plan to propose to Glenn if she survives, laughing like she's already written her death flag. But before she can go full kamikaze, Teet shows up and tells her to dissolve the idea of taking her man. She also reminds the stallion that she's not as tough as she thinks. Glenn shows up, throwing everyone's plans into the trash. They waste no time trekking to the giant, and when they finally see her, it's like a scene straight out of Attack on Titan. Glenn, ever the diplomat, tries to negotiate, but the giant sneezes and blows them all back with a gust of snot. Turns out, the giant isn't angry, she's sick. Glenn and his crew encounter Dion, a gentle giant with a 10-year-old cold, which she's hilariously tried to sleep off. Glenn, tasked with treating her, finds himself tangled, literally, in her melons, discovering they're as soft as cushions. Dion eventually takes Glenn's medicine, and the harpies hang out with her like it's a giant slumber party. The rumors about Dion being evil are debunked, and with some help she becomes the best-dressed giant around. Later, as Glenn attends a ceremony, Tessalia's flustered bravery is challenged by Teet's bold claim to Glenn's genetic materials. Glenn and Teet get an invite from Lady Scotty, but the event ends with Lady Scotty collapsing, causing panic. Glenn and Teet rush to Lady Scotty's palace, but they're stopped at the door because Lady Scotty's main doctor, Cthulhu, is already on the case. When they finally get to meet Cthulhu, her tentacles get way too touchy-feely with Glenn. Just when it looks like this could turn a serious tentacle clap out, Teet steps in and calls out Cthulhu's antics. Teet calls Cthulhu a certified man-clapper who's been around more blocks than a used car, while Cthulhu tries to save face. Eventually, Cthulhu gets serious, thanking them for their concern, but making it clear that she's not at liberty to discuss too much about Lady Scotty's condition. Cthulhu does let them in on one crucial detail. Lady Scotty has a rare disease that is gradually taking over her body, putting her at risk of heart failure. The only thing keeping her alive is her dragon blood, but even that might not be enough for long. Glenn presses for more information, but Cthulhu shuts him down, explaining that Lady Scotty herself has lost the will to fight for her life. Lady Scotty then tells Glenn the tragic tale of how this tumor is the price a dragon must pay for abandoning their place among the gods to live with humans. Over time, her dragon form has become more human-like, and she has no hope of returning to her former glory. Glenn's examination is thorough. If we only heard the sounds of this, one would think he's seriously clapping out this dragon like Donkey from Shrek. Just as the situation becomes tense, Kunai and Teet burst into the room, catching Lady Scotty in a vulnerable state. They freak out, but Lady Scotty calms them down, saying the examination is over. The next day, Glenn confronts Cthulhu, who is waving her tentacles around like she's the star of some aquatic action movie. He lays out his plan, connecting the veins back to the heart right after they remove the tumor using Cthulhu's tentacles. Cthulhu is skeptical, but Glenn isn't backing down. He convinces her that they can pull it off, even if the odds are straight from 1x bet. Cthulhu, still doubtful, lashes out, wrapping him up in her tentacles. She demands to know if he really thinks he can save Lady Scotty. Glenn, Cthulhu decide to join the madness. She embraces Teet and Glenn like she's pleasuring her tentacles by clapping their skin. The tentacle bonding moment isn't over. Cthulhu reminds Glenn that they need one more person for the surgery, and I know that you know who comes to mind. However, Arania flat out refuses. Glenn, desperate, begs like he's really in need of her clapping, but she tells him to go and find someone else. Luckily, Teet knows the secret cheat code, matching nurse cosplay. With that, Arania is in. Teet reveals that Arania was always going to accept. She just wanted to make things more dramatic. They move on to planning the surgery, facing challenges like they're in a Hunter x Hunter exam arc. Kunai visits Scotty to convince her to trust Glenn and the team with the surgery, but Scotty believes that fate is written in stone. In the city, Glenn meets up with Mimi, the Cyclops, who apparently has a phobia of two-eyed people. Before they head off to meet her boss, Mimi bumps into someone, and all her pointy melons pop out like they've wanted to. Glenn the mind claps her and receives a brain-setting slap for it. They meet the boss of the Cyclops workshop, and Glenn requests custom-made equipment for Scotty's surgery. The boss takes this as a personal challenge. He warns Glenn that crafting the needle will be like crafting the greatest weapon of all time, the Excalibur. He turns to Mimi for the job, but she's hesitant. Glenn encourages her, and she agrees. Later, Glenn hears that Mimi has collapsed and rushes over. He examines her, revealing more of her skin to help her breathe, which triggers Mimi to recall her moment of purpose, Scotty's speech that inspired the Cyclops to become healers instead of weapons makers. Mimi wakes up, blushing furiously, calling Glenn a certified clapper for ogling at her sweet melons. Teet, hearing this, demands answers while Arania hands Mimi a shirt, scolding Glenn for his lack of consideration. The next day, Glenn asks Mimi what caused her to feel unwell. She reveals that her motion sickness came from using a special machine needed for the needle. Back at the workshop, Mimi apologizes to her boss, who apologizes in return. Mimi then unveils her secret weapon, a machine capable of mass-producing the needles like a Full Metal Alchemist automail factory. Glenn compliments Mimi's eyebrow. She remembers he's a verified clapper. She runs away. A few days later, Scotty and Kunai attend a meeting with some goofy-looking monsters, and Glenn is waiting to pull one last move to convince Scotty to get the surgery. Back at the clinic, Glenn continues training Arania, who tells Teet to be blunt with her feelings and tell Glenn she wants to clap the living daylight out of him and drain him of all his but Teet is confident Glenn will always come back to her. Later, the girls have a night out with Tessalia, where they discuss the anesthesia for Scotty's surgery. They eventually decide alcohol is the best option. Arania, never one to miss a drinking opportunity, starts downing shots like she's in Fate Stay Night's Holy Grail War. The conversation turns to love, and Arania, who swings both ways, reveals she'd love to take Tessalia and Teet on a date that has a happy clapping end. She wants to bust her webs all over their silky skin. Meanwhile, Glenn is busy trying to convince Scotty to go through with the surgery. Scotty, baffled by his persistence, wonders why he's on a daily mission to save her. Scotty, who feels her life's mission is complete, explains she descended from heaven and helped build a peaceful city. As far as she's concerned, her storyline is wrapped up and she's ready to roll the credits. But Glenn goes full My Hero Academia on her, telling her she's got a whole city of people praying for her recovery. His passionate speech hits Scotty like a Tokyo Ghoul field trip, making her reconsider, and finally, Scotty agrees to the surgery. The big day arrives, and with Scotty knocked out by anesthesia, they start the operation. Opening her chest is tricky. Turns out, dragon anatomy isn't human. Cthulhu warns them that Scotty's body is more resistant than Saitama from One Punch Man. Sure enough, the knives struggle against her tough dragon skin, which is harder than Guts from Berserk. As they cut into the tumor, Scotty's body heats up, turning molten because dragons get fiery when in danger. Cthulhu picks up every surgical knife, telling the girls to back off. She demands Glenn help, despite Scotty's body glowing like a Dragon Ball Z power-up. With Scotty's chest open, Glenn finally cuts out the tumor. The whole city holds its breath, and when they carry Scotty out, Glenn declares the surgery a success. Later, they hold a ceremony in the middle of the city. Scotty speaks to her people, promising to continue serving as their protector. The crowd goes wild like they just saw a live performance from Hatsune Miku. Kunai congratulates Scotty on her recovery, and Scotty is grateful for everything that happened thanks to Glenn. But she's got something more personal on her mind. She asks Kunai where Glenn is, and when she finds out he's back at the clinic, Scotty doesn't waste a second. She's on her way to clap the out of him. She wants to be his dragon baby mama.
What did he say?
Meanwhile, Glenn's busy taking care of Teet, who's acting like a lost puppy. Glenn notices something's off and asks her to open her mouth for an examination. As he sticks his fingers in her throat, she sings the songs of angels. Teet tries to stay quiet. Glenn quickly identifies the problem and fixes it. Teet, blushing like she's in a Toradora confession scene, tries to hide her embarrassment as Glenn heads off for his next job. Later, Glenn runs into Scotty and Kunai after their carriage crashes. Scotty, thrilled to see him, jumps into his arms and begs him to make her completely his and clap her till thy kingdom. Kunai pulls her away, telling her to chill out. But Scotty's not done. She opens her clothes and shows off her melons and beautiful scaly dragon skin. But he's as unresponsive as a certified clapper. He asks her to button up, but she insists he do it for her. Glenn obliges, but Scotty's feeling down, probably because she was hoping for a Dragon Ball level clap out. But before the mood gets more awkward, Mimi shows up and gets their carriage back in shape. Scotty thanks Mimi for saving her and gives everyone a giant wine barrels. Glenn, checking the time, asks Mimi to keep an eye on the barrels while he heads off to make a house call. Orania visits Teet and gives her an address, teasing her by saying she'll take Glenn away if Teet doesn't get better soon. Teet, not one to back down, tells Orania that Glenn will always be hers. Meanwhile, in the Harpy village, Dion is helping by lifting boulders like she's training with Goku on King Kai's planet, but the melon's on her throat, and to name the melonier not by size, I named Tessalia the princess with jugs that could feed me a whole week. She is my chosen melonier. These centaurs have changed my perspective on them. The villagers invite Dion to join their celebration, offering her food, which she reciprocates by giving them enough food to feed 3 villages. Back in the city, Glenn returns to Mimi and announces he's found someone to help carry the wine barrels. Enter Celia and her crew with a carriage, ready to save the day. They part ways, with Warnick carrying Mimi in her carriage, and Glenn, Telia, and Kunai head back to the clinic. Once back, they start discussing Glenn's future marriage with Telia. It's a wild conversation straight out of Orin High School Host Club. They debate how many kids they'll have and how often the rest can join in the clapping business. Glenn tries to decline, but Telia assures him that Teet will get her turn twice a week if he accepts. At the clinic, Teet worries some unworthy man clapping girl will steal Glenn away. Orania, never missing a chance to tease, reminds her that Glenn can examine, rearrange, water, juicify the peach of different girls with his Excalibur and make them shake for joy, sing the songs of angels and make them water like fountains. Suddenly, Ellie shows up, bringing food from her village. She asks Teet where Glenn is, and just in time, Glenn arrives. All the girls swarm him, wanting his attention and some of his Excalibur. Teet gets jealous, stopping the others from getting too close, while Scotty and Kunai show up with more food. Scotty calls Glenn her clapper and baby dragon father, and this leaves Teet feeling more jealous, just as Mimi and the Cyclops gang show up to join the party. Teet hatches a plan. Later, they cook all the food and throw a massive party. Everyone's having a blast, gossiping about how popular Glenn has become. Telia warns the group that Scotty is a new rival, but Scotty isn't bothered. She tells Glenn the world has become more beautiful since the surgery and thanks the for changing her mind. Scotty gets cozy with Glenn, and Teet, not wanting to be outdone, pulls him away with her tail, squeezing him tight. We all know no one wants to clap Glenn more than Teet, and no one wants to clap my girl more than me right now. If you like the video, make sure to check out one of these other two right here. Also, if you want to see the full plot-filled version, no restrictions, just subscribe to our Patreon in the description below.